Councillors, I'm about to formally open the meeting, so I'll now request that the live streaming of the meeting commence. Can I confirm with our officers that the audio staff that live streaming has commenced? Yep, thank you. Okay, thank you. Good evening, councillors, members of the gallery and our viewers watching the live streaming of tonight's meeting. My name is Councillor Trent McCarthy and I'm the Deputy Mayor of Darebin City Council. As Mayor Messina is an apology tonight, I'll be the chairperson of tonight's planning meeting. So it's my pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's meeting here in person at Preston Town Hall, and of course welcome to those joining us via the live streaming and also in the council building. I declare this meeting open at 6:03 p.m. Sorry, 6:35 p.m. I should say. So welcome, councillors. I'd just like to read out the acknowledgement, councillors. Darebin City Council acknowledges the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people as the traditional owners and custodians of the land and waters we now call Darebin, and pays respect to their elders past, present and emerging. Council pays respect to all other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities in Darebin. Council recognises and pays tribute to the diverse culture, resilience and heritage of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We acknowledge the leadership of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and the right to self-determination in the spirit of mutual understanding and respect. The health, safety and well-being of the community has and will always be the paramount consideration of Council. Council continues to be guided by the government directives and wants to be able to do the right thing for the health of our community during the COVID-19 pandemic. This meeting is open to the public in line with current health restrictions. This meeting is also being live streamed via a link on the council website, so the public will be able to view the proceedings of the meeting. The meeting is also being recorded and will be made available on the council website as soon as practicable after the meeting. Before we begin tonight, I want to set out my expectations in regard to our behaviour and remind councillors of our obligations under our Code of Conduct. At Darebin, we pride ourselves on being a progressive and contemporary council. In the interests of demonstrating exemplary leadership, I have high expectations that we will all be professional in our conduct throughout this meeting and respectful in our debate. The Chamber is both a workplace and a public space, and we have an obligation to ensure that the working environment and public forums are safe for everyone, both emotionally as well as physically. I want to be clear, I will not tolerate any form of personal acrimony or insult, grandstanding or yelling. Nor will I put up with talking over the top of one another or any use of unreasonable or impolite language or objections. Okay, thank you, councillors. So before we commence, I'd like to introduce the councillors that are in attendance tonight. So councillors, I'll just invite you just to greet us all, and obviously we are in person. So Councillor Gaetano Greco, we'll just check that your microphone's working. If you can, say hello. So Councillor Greco, if you can just check that your microphone's working correctly.
Yep.
Councillor Greco?
Welcome.
Yep, thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Tom Hannon.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you, Councillor Hannon. Councillor Tim Lawrence.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor, and good evening, everyone.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Suzanne Newton.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor and everyone.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Susan Rennie.
Hi, great to be here.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Julie Williams.
Welcome. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you, Councillor. I'd also like to introduce officers that are in attendance tonight. So Chad Griffiths, the Acting General Manager of City Sustainability and Strategy. So welcome, Chad. Catherine Pound, the Manager of City Development, up the back there. Thank you. Jolien Boyle, Coordinator of Statutory Planning, is not tonight. And Julie Smout, Coordinator of Statutory Planning. Thank you, Julie. Okay, so let's get underway, councillors. And I should also note under our apologies item 2 that Mayor Messina and Councillor Demetriadis apologies tonight, and we wish them well. Councillors, disclosures of conflict of interest. Councillors and officers, are there any interests or conflicts that any of you wish to declare in relation to items on this evening's agenda? No? If there are none, we'll move and I will just note that there are no conflicts of interest to declare. Thank you, councillors. So we'll now move on to the confirmation of the minutes of the last Planning Committee meeting. So, councillors, could I please have a motion for the adoption of the minutes of the Planning Committee meeting held on the 14th of February 2022? Councillor Rennie, thank you. That's moved by Councillor Rennie. Is there a seconder? Councillor Williams. Thank you, Councillor. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Okay, that's unanimous, including myself. Thank you, councillors. So we'll note that that's unanimous. Item 6, consideration of reports. Application for planning permit D764 2020 224 Broadway Reservoir. Councillors, that's the item. Officers, I'll just invite you to present to the committee on the presentation of this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. This report concerns a proposal for a 4-storey mixed-use development comprised of 2 ground floor shops and 18 dwellings at 224 Broadway in Reservoir, which is in the Reservoir Major Activity Centre. Notification of the proposal was given and no objections were received. The proposal has a high level of compliance with the relevant policies and provisions of the planning scheme, including the requirements of the Reservoir Structure Plan, which identifies a preferred height limit of up to 5 storeys, as well as mixed-use development with residential above shops in this particular precinct. A reduction of the standard car parking requirement has been sought and is supported by officers. There are some generally minor items identified to be addressed through conditions, and accordingly, it's recommended tonight to support the proposal and issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit with conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillors, are there any questions in relation to this item? No, councillors? Well, if there are no questions, we'll then move to debate. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Greco. Would you like to, are you moving the officer recommendation?
Yeah, I'll be moving the officer recommendation.
Greco. Councillor Newton, I saw your hand next as the seconder. Councillor Greco, you have the floor.
Say a few words in relation to this application. I thank the officers for presenting this tonight, and the officers have basically covered the essential elements of this application. As it's been said, there's 18 dwellings. 5 of those dwellings will be a 2-bedroom, and 13 of the dwellings will be 1-bedroom. I must say at the outset I would have liked a better mix, but I understand obviously in the area of Reservoir there are a lot of large properties with numerous bedrooms. I think the key point here about this application that it's in a main activity centre, and the really key point is that under the it's probably the first of further anticipated mixed-use developments along Broadway that fit within the envelope of our structure plan. Structure plan's about 10 or 12 years old, and this will be the first to see along Broadway where we have a major development of this particular size. It's 4 stories, and I think it will provide an impetus for that area in terms of development along that corridor. As has been mentioned by the officers, it ticks off on many of the boxes, and it's something that I believe that traders and residents in that particular area would welcome in regards to the size of the development in terms of stimulating and promoting the further development of that stretch of shops along Broadway. So I commend the motion and seek that councillors support the recommendation.
Councillor Greco, and I should just also note before we go to the seconder that there were no submitters in relation to this item, just so we're all clear. So apologies for not noting that earlier. Councillor Newton, as the seconder, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Chair. So I think this is a good development. I often think about looking at these, is this somewhere I'd like to live? And I would say yes for this development. It's an area of Reservoir that has changed a lot in the last few years. We've got the new station, and there are some permits for applications like this on the other side, on Edward Street, but I I agree with Councillor Greco that we haven't seen a lot of this on the Broadway side, but I do think it's very welcome. This is an area that has a lot more cafes, a lot more bars than it did a few years ago. And I really appreciate that. I think there's 7 apartments that don't have car spaces, and that makes sense because it's 330 metres from Reservoir Station. So this is somewhere where you could live, you could hop on a train, go into work in the city, and you would not need a car. So I think it's a great application and happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Are there any other speakers in relation to this item? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, I'd like to speak in favour of the application, approving the application. As has been noted, it's well within the 5-storey envelope of structure plan that's been developed here. It has been noted by other councillors that there's minimal mid-rise or multi-storey that have gone into this street. That's partly dictated because of small land holdings and narrow land holdings. So in those circumstances, we really need to approve these type of applications because they fit within our policy guidelines, and they are an opportunity because of the footprints being put here that can sustain a decent application. So it's a good opportunity, and hopefully it spurs some of the other owners along Broadway to think about developing their properties too.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there any further speakers in relation to this item? If there are none, councillors, I'll put this item to the vote. Those in favour? Okay, we'll note that that's unanimous. Thank you, councillors. So I'll just note, the Planning Committee has decided to support the application and issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit subject to conditions. This decision is not final. An objector can appeal the decision, and the applicant can appeal any conditions at VCAT. The process of appeal is subject to timeframes detailed on the documentation to be sent to any objectors and the applicant. Thank you, councillors. So we'll move to the next item.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. The second item is an application for a dual occupancy at 20A Dundas Street, Thornbury. There's proposed 2 new dwellings in tandem. Both dwellings are 2-bedroom dwellings, and a single car space is provided for each dwelling. Private open space is at the ground level for both of the dwellings, vehicle access from a right-of-way at the rear, and pedestrian access through to Dundas Street. Notice was given via a sign on site and notices in the mail. Council received 6 objections to this process, and they're summarised on page 75, and then the officer's comments are in detail on pages 75 through to 78. The applicant then reviewed the objections and, in order to carry out a consultation with the objectors, amended the plans in order to address as many of the objectors' concerns as possible. These plans were re-advertised, and the original objectors retained their objections, and 2 of the original objectors just reiterated them a second time. The proposed development complies with the requirements of Clause 55 either completely or through a condition of planning permit. Therefore, the officer's recommendation is to issue a notice of decision to support the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Rennie.
Thank you for the comprehensive report. I'm interested in the concept of street address, and obviously that's difficult on this one because the frontage on Dundas Street is 1.2 metres, but in fact in many ways the entrance to the properties is via the laneway. As I look at the diagrams, it's unclear to me what the laneway presentation is going to be, whether it's going to be open or, like other properties in that laneway, just carports. And I'm interested in understanding when and whether it would be possible for the laneway to be named and for properties to have more of a street frontage onto the laneway at some stage in the future, given this is not the only property in this kind of situation in this area.
Thank you, through you, Deputy Mayor. The rear or the southern elevation of the proposed development is pretty much boundary to boundary with one of the rooms is the master bedroom, and the other balance of the elevation is the 2 car parking spaces that would have a roller door. It's fairly limited in its openness to that right-of-way, other than names on roller doors to identify the different, the main pedestrian access is through Dundas Street and that large. There's a condition on the suggested or recommended notice of decision that encourages more work be done on the arbour, the entrance to identify a sense of security, safety, identity, to council's satisfaction, to ensure that it's a more inviting and safer pedestrian entrance to the development. But that is the title to the land that has that pedestrian access. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could follow up, just to understand, if you could describe a bit what we might see if a permit was granted and those conditions were met. What might the presentation to Dundas Street look like?
Thank you. It may be certainly a structure, a fairly open structure that identifies identifies to the passerby that there's the 2 dwellings at the rear. It needs a bit of security, so that openness, so that passers-by can see what's happening. It's inviting. There may be some lighting, or there may be some planting that's safe, but encouraging, and that invitation to say, if you're looking for 20A Unit 1 or Unit 2, this is how you go down there, and you feel safe to go down there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor, is there any further questions? If there are none, then we'll close the questions and we'll invite the applicant to make their submission. So we'll call Mr. Anthony Scarpacci. Welcome, Mr. Scarpacci. My name is Councillor Trent McCarthy. I'm the chair of the meeting. Welcome to the meeting. You have an opportunity to provide a submission, so over to you.
Yes, thank you, councillors. My name is Anthony Scarpacci, a town planner from Clement Stone Town Planners, and obviously representing the applicant. Look, I'll just touch on some points. Ms. Smout did adequately summarise the site and proposal, but I will go further with that. So firstly, maybe I'll touch on the site context. It is one of the last sites, the vacant sites in Thornbury. It's clearly envisioned for future residential development when it was originally subdivided in 2012. And notably, it's a substantial change area, which is the highest order of development within Darebin. And medium to high density development is envisioned within these areas. There is a long history with the previous refusal on the site in 2019. In developing, I guess, the revised proposal, there was a heavy consideration as to why this was refused by the tribunal. The main aspects were visual bulk towards the site interfaces. There was overshadowing issues to the small courtyard to the west at 18B Dundas Street. And it was assessed to be poor internal amenity for the future occupants of those dwellings. So there are positive aspects of the proposal. I think notably full compliance with the standards of Clause 55, which is not always easy on a site that is only 350 square metres. And we think that's notable and commendable on behalf of the architect. As Ms. Smout said, it has been quite an iterative process in terms of addressing the ongoing issues from council and also the objectors. There have been multiple rounds of plan updates to be sent. Overshadowing to both sides has been fully addressed now. There is no overshadowing at any time between 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Privacy, all the windows have been screened in accordance with the relevant standard. Visual bulk, the upper floor is quite compact.
We'll just get you to wrap up there, Mr. Scarpacci.
Sure. If I can just summarise, the applicant and the designers have gone to every attempt to remedy the issues by council and the objectors. And we respectfully request that councillors uphold council's own decision and grant that a notice of decision be issued. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scarpacci, and thank you for joining us this evening.
That's great.
Okay, so councillors will, that's it. So we'll invite you back to the other room. Thank you. And councillors will now invite the objector, Mr. Jeremy Lewington, to submit. Good evening, Mr. Lewington. Thank you. My name's Councillor Trent McCarthy. I'm chairing the meeting, and you have 2 minutes to present your submission.
Thank you, councillors. My name's Jeremy Lewington, and I'm a resident in Unit 5, 24 Dundas Street. And today I'm here to object with 2 key points, being bulk, scale and setback, and most importantly, shadows. So firstly, bulk, scale and setback. The first floor of dwelling 2 is not stepped really at all and presents its full facade above and right across our fence line. And there's ample scope to reduce the bulk and size of level 2 by removing the upstairs study, a non-habitable room, reducing the first floor component and articulating the master bedroom, walk-in wardrobe and bathroom, stepping the top floor back a metre, reducing the impact significantly on shadowing issues for our property. Comparatively, our 2-storey dwelling is set back by 6 metres at some points, with the applicant halving this. Which leads to my next point, which is shadows. And I'd like to state that this affects no one more than Kerry in Unit 7, 24 Dundas Street, who unfortunately cannot be here today, who, being a west-facing property, is set to lose almost all of her natural light in the afternoon, with excessive shadowing from Unit 2. In current working from home climate, she's obviously very distressed about this and has stated that it could cause emotional distress, with her previously sunny apartment becoming dark and cold by 2 p.m. Again, this is a problem that needs to be addressed by reducing the scale and increasing the setback. And likewise, in our unit, Unit 5, 24 Dundas, we currently get much needed sun in the afternoons from 4 p.m. Coming through the door and through the windows. Without this, it will significantly impact livability, increasing electricity costs, and just, again, our mental well-being. I think in summary, looking through the plans, I've really tried to put myself in the shoes of the applicant. Understandably, they're trying to make as much value, I'll wrap up really quickly, as much value as they can, but I think the block's simply too narrow for 2 double-storey buildings like this. There's no way it can work for both of us.
Thank you, Mr. Lewington, for your submission this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Do we have a motion? Councillor Newton.
Can I ask a question to the officers?
I believe that we can't do questions at this point, is that right? Unless, I'll just get some clarity. Not at this point, no. No, so I think, yep. Thanks, councillor. So councillors, is there a motion? Councillor Rennie.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'll move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Is there a seconder for the officer's recommendation moved by Councillor Rennie? Councillor Hannan. Councillor Hannan seconding. Councillor Rennie, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you. I've spent quite a lot of time looking at this application and actually visiting the site, including the right-of-way at the rear of this property. And ultimately have decided that this application should be supported for a number of reasons. And I understand that it is a change for the neighbours, and I really thank those people who have participated in the process by putting in objections, and particularly those who have come tonight to speak to this matter. Ultimately, in looking at all of the properties along this stretch, the built form does, in most cases, go right to the back fence or very close to the back fence. So the built form that's proposed on this block of land is not out of character with the built form on other blocks, the whole length of this laneway. That's because some blocks have already been developed in a very similar way, including the one next door, and because other blocks have actually lost their initial residence in favour of seeing a more apartment-style typology built over the entire site. And in weighing up whether to support this or not, I felt as though, and continue to feel that, if this development doesn't go ahead, there is every chance that at some stage someone will want to develop the entire site, even though I understand it's now on different titles, from Dundas Street right through to the laneway. And were that to happen, the built form would actually be significantly more bulky and larger than the built form that's proposed. This built form actually has some articulation between the two dwellings, so there is a break, they're not continuous. I'd also note that it's likely that there will be some sunlight that comes back into play when the sun goes to the west, it starts to swing back round to the south a bit, and there will be scope later in the day potentially for sun to start to come back in, if that makes sense. So the sun goes from east to west, but it also starts in a slightly more southerly point, swings north and then comes back to the south. Notwithstanding that, this is a somewhat unusual development. And the reason I really looked twice is because I was very interested in that concept of street address. But it would be worthwhile people actually having a look at the Dundas Street frontage and noting that the property next door has exactly the same issue with street address and with this narrow entrance to the property at the back. So if this development goes ahead, it will in fact match the development next door where this has already occurred. And I believe ultimately may well result in a longer term protection from a heavier, bulkier built form on this block of land, should some other type of development be proposed instead. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Councillor Hannan as the seconder, would you like to speak to the motion?
I'll reserve my right for the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hannan. Are there any other speakers in favour or against? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, through you, Deputy Mayor. I'd like to speak in opposition to the recommendation. I'm fairly familiar with the site and the street around there. There's a great deal of bulky, dense 1960s, 1970s flats along there. This is, not duplicating what was done then, and I would hope that wouldn't get duplicated. But the fact remains that we do need to give some consideration to the amenity between these blocks. It isn't a situation like High Street, I don't think, where you're having butting multi-storey developments butting against each other because the commercial shops already do. What we have is a fairly substandard set of flats that run along this area, and I don't think we should be adding to poor living outcomes on that. I think we should be using the redevelopment process along Dundas Street to create greater solar access, and I think that is possible. I take note of the comment that maybe this is a low-rise proposal that will block out a bulkier application, but I would note that the separate title means that the front block still has the option to come back with a proposal based on the heights that are there at another time anyway. It seems to me the residents objecting are asking for minor alterations to the built form to preserve sunlight, and I think that's something that should have been explored more.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there any further speakers to this item? If there are none, then Councillor Hannan, do you wish to exercise your seconding?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Look, I'll just say briefly that I think Councillor Rennie has covered the rationale quite well. Given the kind of context of the proposal, there is some overlooking and some overshadowing, and I'm very sympathetic to the objection by the neighbours. But I just note from the staff report that these concerns have been looked at, they've been assessed. There have been substantial changes made to the previous version of this application to address those issues. And on balance, the impacts are minor. So you know, it's never ideal or perfect in balancing these things up. But I think with the large list of conditions that you see from the officer's report, I think they're appropriate, and I commend the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hannan. So, councillors, I'll put that. That's the officer recommendation. Sorry, Councillor Rennie, you've got the right of reply.
Thank you. I would invite councillors to have a look at the back lane and the built form to the back lane along this stretch. So this is not an unusual proposal in this context. I think it's also pretty important to actually look at the compliance report and how often, colleagues, do we get a compliance report that shows 100% compliance with setbacks, with site coverage, with permeability. Not very often through this chamber. And, you know, I am and have been the first to call out instances where we haven't had 100% compliance, and particularly to call out times when, you know, we find out that it's compliant with an objective but not compliant with a standard, or the other way around. This, in all cases, is compliant with everything. And I think that that makes it very difficult to knock back. And, you know, I do understand that this is very difficult for residents who are concerned about the impact. And I don't want to discount that or dismiss the fact that it is quite a shock if you're used to having open sky out your window to suddenly see something that looks different out your window. But the planning rules are pretty clear that this development is acceptable, and in terms of what else we see in this location, it's also very clear that it's in keeping with what else has happened in the area. But importantly, when I actually looked at these two homes that are going to be built, they are quite nice homes. I like the fact that they're not reverse living, that these are homes that people will be able to live. One of them's got the primary bedroom on the ground floor, so that offers good accessibility outcomes. And I know that many, many families want homes in this area, and this will build 2 more homes for families who are very keen to live here.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Right on time. So, councillors, that closes the debate. Those in favour? So, Councillor Hannan, Councillor Greco, Councillor Rennie, Councillor Newton and myself, Councillor McCarthy. Those against? Councillor Lawrence and Councillor Williams. The motion is carried. So, councillors, the Planning Committee has decided to support the application and issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit subject to conditions. This decision is not final. An objector can appeal the decision, and the applicant can appeal any conditions at VCAT. The process of appeal is subject to timeframes detailed in the documentation to be sent to the objector and the applicant. And thank you all. Councillors, we are now moving to item 6, which is other business. So item 6.1, general planning information scheduled VCAT applications. Councillors, there's a motion there. Is there a mover of the recommendation? Councillor Rennie, thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Greco, thank you very much. Unless there's any points you wish to make, I'll move straight to the vote. Those in favour? Yep, that's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Item 7, consideration of reports considered confidential. Councillors, we have a confidential report to consider and a supplementary report as well. So councillors will need to have a motion in just a moment that in accordance with the section, sorry, I should just get this correct here, section 66(2) of the Local Government Act. So councillors, do I have a motion to move us into camera? Councillor Rennie, Councillor Williams seconding. So I'll just put that straight to the vote, councillors. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously, yep. So thank you, councillors. So just to be clear, in accordance with section 66(2) of the Local Government Act 2020, Council has resolved to close the meeting to members of the public to consider the item designated confidential by the Chief Executive Officer on the basis that the matters are considered confidential in accordance with section 3(1) of the Act. So that has been adopted. So, councillors, I'll declare that the meeting has been closed to the members of the public, and I'll request that we stop the live streaming now. Thank you.